Hello, friends. The 1112th day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Russia's offensive in the Kursk region continues. The enemy's Telegram channels wrote today about their troops entering Sudzha. They first published a photo of a soldier at the steel, and then a video at the northeastern entrance to the city from the side of Martinovka, recently taken by the Russians. The fact that the Russians are already on the outskirts of Sudzha is confirmed by unofficial Ukrainian sources, the editor-in-chief of the publication, Censor Butusov, and the Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State. According to Butusov, fighting is already underway on the outskirts of Sudzha, and the Ukrainian armed forces are retreating with fighting. The Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State also reported in the evening about the Russians entering the eastern part of Sudzha. The enemy is digging in and pulling its forces into the eastern part of the city of Sudzha. The defense forces are taking up appropriate lines to contain the pressure of the Russians to stabilize the situation. But this is very difficult, writes Deep State. Our telegram channel also calls for more attention on the left flank along the Zhuravka-Novinki section, where the enemy is actively trying to get to Basivka. Russian military telegram channels write that the Russian army has approached Sudzha closely from the north, east and southeast, taking Kazachalakhnia in the north, Dmitrukov, Zumost-E, and Makhnovka. Photos and videos of Russian flags being raised are published from there. As for the situation in Sudzha itself, conflicting information is coming from Russian telegram channels. Some write that the fighting is taking place on the outskirts. Others that it is already in the center. Still others that there is no longer any organized resistance from the Ukrainian armed forces in Sudzha, and that Ukrainian troops are leaving the city and are trying to build a new line of defense near the villages of Guglievka and Rubazhchina in order to prevent the highway to the Sumy region from being cut off and to ensure the withdrawal of forces from Sudzha. Russian telegram channels publish videos allegedly showing the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Sudzha. The Russian Defense Ministry claims that, over the past 24 hours, their troops have captured 12 villages. Ukraine has not confirmed or commented on this. A map from the Ukrainian military telegram channel Deep State also shows a major advance by the Russians. Let me remind you that the problems of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region worsened back in February, when the Russians were able to take Sverdlikovo. This allowed them to intensify shelling of the highway to Sudzha, and then drive a wedge south of Sudzha, cutting off most of the Ukrainian bridgehead from the border. And then, on March 8, the Russians carried out a gas pipeline raid into the rear of the Ukrainian troops north of Sudzha, with a simultaneous strike on the outer edge of the Ukrainian bridgehead from the north and northeast. All this together led to the collapse of the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine and to the rapid advance of Russian troops in the last 3 days. Now the Kursk bridgehead, according to the Deep State map, has decreased to 197 square kilometers. In early February, it was 438 square kilometers. At the official level in Ukraine, the order for the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region has not yet been confirmed, but they have not commented on the situation in any detail either. Of the latest statements, there are only yesterday's words of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine Sirsky that Ukrainian troops are maneuvering to advantageous defense lines. However, if the Russians are indeed already entering Sudzha and at the same time control the entrances to the city from both sides, then further defense of this city will be an extremely difficult task, creating the risk of encirclement of Ukrainian troops. In the event of a withdrawal of the Ukrainian army from Sudzha, there will be no other large settlements in this direction that Ukrainian troops could catch on to and organize defense. True, for some time they can hold the defense in the Guevo area. This is the southernmost part of the bridgehead. However, Russian troops are already actively advancing there, both from the north and from the east. In these conditions, the main question is the ability of the Ukrainian armed forces to stop the further advance of Russian troops into the Sumy region. Regarding the reasons for the collapse of the defense of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region, a version has become popular in the Western media that this happened because of Trump's suspension of military aid to Ukraine. However, as I have already said, in fact, the problems of the Ukrainian forces began back in February due to attacks on logistics, which made it extremely problematic to supply the group of the Ukrainian armed forces on the bridgehead. The Ukrainian military also states that the suspension of American aid did not play a significant role. Andriy, a drone unit commander operating in the Kursk region, told the Washington Post that troops there have not yet felt the impact of the suspension of American military support and that Ukraine's armed forces are retreating because the Russians are now pressing from all sides. A fighter with the 82nd Brigade, call sign Crimea, added that the situation is difficult because the Russians control the logistics routes. Last night there was the largest drone attack on Russia since the beginning of the war, and also the largest raid on Moscow and the Moscow region. In Russia, this attack was called a show performance by Ukraine on the eve of the meeting with the Americans in Saudi Arabia. Let me remind you that at these negotiations, Kiev intended to propose the idea of a partial truce in the air and at sea while continuing hostilities on land. It is possible that Ukraine's current strike on Russia had, first of all, an informational value to demonstrate that the Ukrainian armed forces can also carry out large-scale airstrikes, and therefore the offer of an air truce is a bilateral compromise and not an offer to the Russians to make unilateral concessions. At the same time, it is worth recognizing that the scale of damage from airstrikes on Ukraine is many times greater than from airstrikes on Russia. The Russian army has a clear advantage in the air. Let's move on to the results of the negotiations between Ukraine and the United States. The key point here is that Ukraine agreed to Trump's demand for an immediate and complete ceasefire. That is, not only in the air and at sea as Kiev initially proposed, but also on land. True, we are not talking about an indefinite ceasefire, but about a 30-day one. But with the possibility of further extension. In exchange for agreement to the ceasefire, the United States resumes military supplies to Ukraine and the transfer of intelligence information. Then the United States will make a similar proposal to declare a 30-day ceasefire to Russia. The White House has already expressed hope that Putin will agree to it. Summing up, we can state that the Ukrainian government is forced to accept Trump's demand for a complete ceasefire, abandoning its plan for an air-sea ceasefire. And now the further course of events will depend on Moscow's reaction. In fact, friends, I am sad about the results of the negotiations. The war parties bet that Putin would reject the ceasefire proposal and the war would continue as before. But with American help, in my personal opinion, and in all likelihood, played out today. I hope that I am wrong. We will follow the developments. Friends, this channel exists solely thanks to your support. If you have the opportunity and desire to support the channel, I will be very grateful to you. I also want to ask you to leave comments. This helps promote the channel. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.